So I'm giving a talk on cultivating energy. And in 2002, there was a new director appointed to the British Museum, and my father's a journalist, and he wrote a little piece about that. And he wrote with some friendly advice. He said, if the ill-behaved tourist hordes, self-obsessed curators, and ill-chosen trustees get you down, go to the Tibetan collections. And he said, in the Tibetan collections, you'll see an 18th century bronze figure in ecstatic rapture trampling obstructions. And he said, it's not beautiful, but rather it expresses the energy released as mind unites with body, wisdom with knowledge, passion with reason, that convinces you, as it was meant to, that there are no demons that you cannot realise and trample underfoot. And I remember reading that and thinking, actually, my dad's onto something. Maybe he's heard something from me. Possibly not. But what I thought he'd seen was really that he'd seen that in those Tibetan figures, it's the expression of energy that's important and not necessarily a kind of fine, refined, beautiful aesthetic. And actually, with that, he was really tapping into some of Bhante Sangharakshita's teaching. Because one of a very important part of Bhante Sangharakshita's teaching is that we need energy to break through into Buddhahood. I mean, in a way, what we need is energy just to keep going in the spiritual life. Sometimes the spiritual life is hard. It requires energy. It requires energy to meditate, to get up early and meditate, to keep an ethical practice going. It's almost like our being has a tendency towards a certain direction, and we're trying to turn it round into something more skillful and positive. And that needs a lot of energy, and sometimes we have to break even sometimes quite unskillful habits. So we need that kind of energy to do that. Apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but someone told me a story about Bhante when he was first setting up the movement in the UK. He'd just come from India, and it was the early days of the movement, and he was thinking about things. Maybe this is my imagination, but he was at a retreat, and he was looking out the window, and he was thinking about the order in the movement and how to set it up. Because, he didn't have a complete plan when he started. He was really responding to the needs of people that he met, and the whole environment that he met. And he was looking out the window, and he saw these two young guys, and they were playing. They were playing with, I don't know if you ever played with these sticks. I don't know what they are, they're some kind of plant, but in the autumn when the plant dies down, they leave these sticks that break quite easily. You can play great sword fights with them. And the whole point of the sword fight is to knock the other person's stick and break it. Maybe no one's played that. But apparently he was looking out the window and he was seeing these two guys on the retreat playing this ridiculous sword fight with these two sticks and laughing their heads off. And apparently this image really, really struck him. He thought, well, this is in a way what we need in the Sangha. We need perhaps a little bit of silliness. We need perhaps a little bit of playing with sticks on occasion. So what is energy? I think it's an interesting question. I don't think I've really got to the bottom of what energy really is. Because it's not a thing in itself. I don't think it's something you can quite measure or you kind of can bottle up and sell in that way. In a way, we only know energy is there by its manifestations. We know energy is there by our actions of body, speech and mind. But it's not like you can really get to what it is in itself, or at least I haven't. I do Qigong, and they talk a lot about Qigong, but the point is that it's a metaphor. It's not a thing in itself. It's not a quantifiable thing. It's when our body, actions of body, speech and mind take on a certain quality. In the Oxford English Dictionary, energy is defined as physical and mental powers required for sustained activity. So we know energy is there when there's a quality of our actions of body, speech and mind. So that's the what we do, what we think and what we say. When those actions of body, speech and mind have a sustained quality, when they're fluid, when they flow easily, when they're bright and clear and vibrant. And Bhante says this is very much related to emotions. When there's emotions involved in actions of body, speech and mind, when your emotions are behind what you do, what you think and what you say, then energy is there. The opposite of this is when our actions of body, speech and mind are unsustained or turbid or stagnant or dull or heavy. I think there's a near enemy also of energy, which I'd just like to say as well, because I think sometimes when we talk about energy, we can think that having energy means being excited. And actually, if you sort of see this, what I was thinking about, well, what is that near enemy? Near enemy means something that isn't quite the thing, but looks like it. So I think excitement can be mistaken for energy, for real energy. And when I say energy, I mean what we call in Sanskrit virya, which I know that Danny would have talked about last week. I'm looking at him. No? Okay, let's go back a little. It's always good to look at the kind of original Buddhist Pali or Sanskrit words for things, because it does reveal something. So they don't have the word energy, they have the word virya. And virya means energy in pursuit of the good. So it's a particular quality that's extremely important in Buddhism that we cultivate. It's one of the 6 perfections, one of the 10 perfections. It's something that is very, very important to develop. And it means energy, but it means energy of a particular kind. It means that kind of bright, clear, sustained energy of body, speech and mind. It's sometimes called vigorous initiatives and wholesome directions, which I always quite like. I quite like to have vigorous initiatives and wholesome directions. But the near enemy to that, so what looks like virya but isn't virya, is excitement. And I think what that is when we've got a kind of compulsive activity. And in that compulsive activity, it's because we don't want to experience ourselves. So in that situation, we start closing down our broader awareness of other people and of the task in hand. And there's a kind of compulsion to do the next thing. Was it Wordsworth who said, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. It's something like that. I think it's very hard to see in oneself, actually. It's much easier to see in others, and it's quite painful sometimes, sometimes when we're working with someone, particularly, and you can just see them sort of running around in this slightly manic way, doing the next thing all the time, but not really completing the task that they've done. So I know when I'm in it, because of my idols, this is my little test myself, my eyes start wandering all over the place. It's like I can't look at one thing at a time. It's very unintegrated. And I remember, I told the shop team, the cafe team, that when I was younger, and I was extremely unintegrated, and I had a friend called Sahaja, and we were having a big argument in the middle of the street, and he kept on telling me I needed to be more integrated. And I was saying, Ben, but what does being more integrated mean? How can I be more integrated? And he said, well, stop your eyeballs rolling around all the time. But in a way, I know what he means. It's a bit like when I'm overexcited and my energy is a bit manic, I can't look at one thing at a time. And I think that's symptomatic of a kind of over-exuberant, excitable energy that's just compulsively trying to get away from what my mental state actually is. So that's the sort of near enemy of energy. It's very, very painful actually to experience, because of course what goes up must come down. And we can't run away from what our experience is underneath forever, even in compulsive activity. And when you run out of compulsive, the activities that you're compulsively holding on to, suddenly it all comes. What's underneath arises, and it can be quite painful to experience. The Buddha talked about restlessness, and he compared it to choppy water. It's like we can't see what's underneath because the water is just sort of whipping up all the time. So that's the near enemy, if you like, of virya. It's not quite energy in pursuit of the good. It's just over-exuberance. It's interesting actually that the Buddha could describe that state as being like choppy water, like little waves on the water. Because he uses a lot the analogy of water for energy. For example, he uses the images of water for higher states of consciousness. He said when you start going into higher states of consciousness, he said it's like being a great lake being filled by this underground stream of clear, bright, bubbling energy. So you get this impression that there's kind of a large body of water, there's quite a lot of calm there. There's calm, but it's being fed by this current of bright and clear inspiration. And sometimes you can feel that quite strongly in meditation. You can feel like your being expands and settles, and yet something's welling up within you that's very, very bright and vibrant. And he said, you can sometimes feel like you're a lotus made from water and surrounded by water, so you're completely saturated by water. So it's a bit like you're saturated by this energy, you're permeated by energy. There's no difference between, there's sort of, it's completely integrated. There's nothing that's apart from energy, if you see what I mean. You're totally, totally filled and saturated with energy, your whole being. And he said sometimes it's a bit like it's a hot day and you've had a lovely cooling bath. I think we're going to have to change this probably in the UK, which is it's a cold day and you've had a really hot bath. The thought of having a cold bath just at the moment is a bit weird. So let's say we've been in a hot bath and then you wrap yourself, he says, in a sheet. Let's go for a big fluffy towel. And you can just walk through the world, but you're clean, you're protected from the world. You contain your own energy, and you take your own warm, clear, bright energy with you, whatever you meet in the world. So yes, so he's comparing energy to water and saying what it feels like. And I think that's important because energy is a metaphor. We mustn't take it too literally. But it's almost like we're cultivating a sense of different kinds of energy, different qualities of energy that we're trying to cultivate. And we're getting a kind of sense of where energy is heading and what kind of energy we have and what kind of energy we want to cultivate. So one of the things that Sangharakshita talks about when he's talking about effort, he says that we need to be aesthetically active. This is what we really explored on Saturday on the day retreat. What this quality of being aesthetically active is in regards to energy and effort. And I think it is cultivating this sense of not just energy, but qualities of energy. Maybe qualities of our action of body, speech and mind, and getting a real sense of what we want to cultivate and what we want to let go of. Is it that we feel that we're wading through a kind of stagnant, blocked, dirty, in a way, water? Or is it choppy? Is the water choppy? And distracting, or do we feel like we're cultivating a great lake being fed by an underground, pure stream of energy. So we're just getting that kind of sense of energy, and you can become quite attuned to it in yourself, in your body, in your thoughts, even in your mind, quality of energy in the mind, quality of energy in the speech, in your speech. And you can also become quite sensitive to the energy in one's environment as well. Of course, we shouldn't get sensitive to the point that we're like, I can't go in there, the energy is just wrong. Because, of course, if we feel like the energy around us is a bit stagnant or blocked or unhappy in a particular way, well, then maybe we can help cultivate a different sort of energy. Maybe we can bring something, maybe we could be the clear underground spring in that situation. So yes, so how do we cultivate energy? Well, I think we need to move away from thinking we either have energy or not. Because if we think about energy as a kind of commodity, we think that there's a kind of stash of energy which we've got or not, that certain activities will take from and deplete, so it's just going to go down towards the end of the day. But actually, it's not quite like that with energy. Because, like all things, energy arises in dependence upon conditions. And those conditions are sometimes external things around us, they're sometimes things that we're doing with actions of body, but they're also internal, they're also actions of speech and actions of thought. We condition our energy by what we think and by what we say and by what we do. So we don't have to be passive in relation to energy. And sometimes, actually, we could cultivate a lot more energy. We're capable of a lot more energy than we think we are. And some people seem to be able to sustain a great deal of activity. And it's of a particular quality that's kind of bright and vibrant, a bit like a kind of great lake. Sometimes we know some people who just seem to have a greater capacity than we do, and who are able to sustain something very positive, maybe even quite a gentle way for quite a long time. So how is it? How is it that they do that? And how is it that we do that? Because sometimes we can do the same activity and feel really depleted at the end of it, and sometimes we can do the same activity and feel really joyful at the end of it and have lots of energy. So we all have different capacity at different times. It's worth taking a look at that. And of course, in Buddhism, the highest expression of energy is called it's called the bodhicitta. And the bodhicitta means when our hearts and minds, citta means heart or mind, is completely focused and absorbed in bodhi, in awakening, in enlightenment. And an example of this, which you might have heard in the life of Vajratara, is that he was in Nagpur when Dr. Ambedkar died. So Dr. Ambedkar was the great leader of the new Indian Buddhists. It's a long story. In fact, I've just written a Mitra study on it. So if you do the Mitra study course, you can read all about this. But anyway, Sangharashtra, he was in Nagpur, and the great leader of the Indian Buddhists had just died, and that was Dr. Ambedkar. And he was asked to address a great gathering of people, and all the speakers before him just broke down. They couldn't say a word, because for them, this man had freed them from slavery. He'd given them everything. He was their inspiration and example, and he'd led them to the Dharma only a few weeks before. So they were just completely heartbroken, and he felt actually it was up to him, as the only one who could actually string a sentence together, apart from anyone else, to take these people forward. And he talked to them about how Dr. Ambedkar would have died, but they were to take the work of Dr. Ambedkar forward. So he started giving this lecture, and he said it was a bit like he could feel this energy arising in him, almost as if there was a great kind of consciousness above him. He thought maybe it was Dr. Ambedkar himself filling him with energy. And over the next few days, he just spent all day giving talks. He said he gave 30 or 40 talks in 3 days. He was giving talks right into the night. He was leading conversion ceremonies for thousands of people. And he said, well, one might expect that after those 3 days, constant activity from the moment he woke up to the moment he went to bed very late, you'd think that he would be quite tired. But he said, actually, I didn't feel tired at all. I felt really refreshed from my visit to Nagpur. And he said it was as if there was an impersonal or super-personal force or energy that was working through me. And this gives us a taste of what it's like, apparently, with when the bodhicitta arises. It's like suddenly we're carried by this great energy for good in the world. And any activity is like a play. It's like a play. It's called Lila. And he said it's even sometimes compared to being like an elephant that just plunges from pool to pool. Which I think might be a little bit of an Indian reference, but one can imagine. A little baby elephant with his big ears flopping from pool to pool. It means that really, in a way, all activity becomes a delight because you're giving to others, you're benefiting others, and this incredible energy just arises and takes you over. So in a way, from a Buddhist point of view, this is what we're trying to develop. We're trying to ultimately develop the bodhicitta, where we're just full of energy and are able to share that energy with others. So that's where we're heading, but how do we cultivate it? I think because it's been quite something that Sangharakshita has thought about a lot, he's got some advice about this. So I'm just going to give you his advice. He says the first thing is that we must make sure that we don't block our energy. And he said this is a particular feature of spiritual practitioners. He said because spiritual practitioners don't want to experience negative emotion, they block any negative emotion that arises. So any kind of thoughts of anger or craving or whatever it is, you tend to block those emotions because you want to be positive. You come to the Sheffield Buddhist Centre, it's a very positive place, and you don't want to be an old grumpy nagaroo right in the middle of that. So you try and be positive, and you try and fit in as well. So we all try and be positive. He said, in that way, people can become very good, but they become weak and bloodless. So what we don't want is the Sanghas to become sort of weak and bloodless, sort of repressed people trying to sit on their anger. Because apart from anything else, it does bulge out. It's a bit like a balloon that you're trying to put in a small box. It's really obvious to everyone else. It's sort of just squeezes out somewhere else. So what do we do? Because obviously we don't want to block our negative emotions, but we don't want to splurge them out on everyone either. It's not like, oh great, everyone's getting in touch with their anger, so they come to Tuesday night and start shouting. I'm prepared to go through that as a stage. It's got to be a stage. It can't go on forever. Well, in a way, what we talk about with in Buddhism is we talk about not blocking, but not drowning either. So what you're trying to do is you're becoming aware of the whole mandala of your emotions, which means that you become aware of sometimes quite a lot of negativity. It's a bit like that thing when you start to do the metta bhavana and you think, oh, I didn't realise I was so angry. If you start saying, I can't find anyone for my fourth stage, and then after about 6 weeks you're going, well, shall I choose 10? In a way, that's quite good. Sangharakshita talks about that himself. In a way, you're realising what all your emotions are. And it's also good to experience the pain of that. It's very painful to be angry with people. It's very painful to be in a state of greed or craving or jealousy or envy, or all those things. So being aware of that whole mandala of emotions, really feeling them, but not feeling like you have to act them out all the time or identify with them or take them too seriously. So yes, so coming into relationship with the whole mandala of our emotions without necessarily having to act them out or identify with them or thinking this is me and mine. But yeah, become aware of them. But he also says that our energy can be blocked by other things in our lives and the way we live our life. And he talks quite a lot actually about meaningless work. So if we, in a way, most of our energy is spent at work, particularly if we work full time. And if we feel like our job is meaningless, we might get all the money in the world for it. But actually what starts to happen is we block our emotions because our emotions aren't involved with our work. And when we block our emotions, we block our energy. So we often find this, if you're doing very dull, repetitive work, you can start feeling very dull and lifeless. And along with that is a feeling blocking our energy because we're frustrated. He said it's a bit like we're all lions in cages. We're these great beings with this great potential. We can be capable of marvellous, marvellous things. We can be capable of limitless energy, capable of limitless positive emotion and limitless wisdom. And yet we feel confined in our lives. And sometimes we really do get that feeling like we're a lion in a cage, just pacing, waiting for our time. And actually, if we have that sense in our life ongoing with, what will happen is we'll start to block our energy. It's a bit like actually you do see lions in zoos, that they start to, their energy starts to become very, very turgid and dull if they're not cared for properly. So it's a bit like that with us. If we feel like our life is confining us, our energy will start to be blocked and heavy and stagnate. And along with that, along with a kind of frustrated life that we can lead, is a lack of meaningful communication. When we feel like there's so much going on in our lives internally, and yet we can't ever really express it. We can't really communicate from our depths. And I think I particularly found this when I was younger. I really did feel like I had so many questions about life. So many things that I was turning over in my mind, or books that I was reading, or interests that I had. And there was no one to talk to about it. And that was just, it destroyed me in a particular way. I think that was the main thing, actually, just that lack of communication. And I was at school at the time, and I just found myself being unable to really express my depths with my school friends. We talked a lot, and I could talk a lot about quite superficial things, but there was something inside me that was much more that was waiting to come out. And the thing that I'm eternally grateful to at the Buddhist Centre was, it wasn't like I went there and immediately had brilliant meditations or anything like that. It was that I found a forum to really talk about stuff. And I was very lucky because the first Buddhist centre that I went to was South London. And we used to have quite an informal environment, and we used to just lie. I remember I used to lie on one sofa and there'd be Dharmaruchi sitting on a chair over there. And we just talked about stuff till about 2 in the morning sometimes. I remember him giving me books on philosophy, and the whole Sangha would be interested in me. And for a 17-year-old, that is undescribably just wonderful. It's such a gift. Like, someone took me seriously and was interested in what I had to say. And all my naive ramblings and half-baked philosophies. And, I don't know what I was saying. But the fact that they actually took me seriously and listened and cared enough to give me philosophy books and books by Bhante, and care what novel I was reading and why I found it interesting. I was just, my whole world opened up. I think Keats talks about this. Is it Keats? Or someone goes to see Keats and he talks about how, he has this conversation with his friend, and he goes and it's like the whole world is filled with gold. There's this landscape that just opens up. that's new and vibrant and exciting. And that's really what can happen in communication, when we communicate from our depths and we're able to meet each other and meet those depths in each other and explore things we hadn't explored before. It's like entering a new and wonderful world. So yes, a lack of meaningful communication can really block our energy. And I think that's really important in the Sangha. If we give each other anything, we must give each other an opportunity to explore half-baked philosophies. And hopefully take them a bit further. And yes, and sometimes we have conditioning. We have conditioning that says it's bad to express emotions, it's bad to express strong feelings. And that if we do express strong feelings, somehow we fail. So this can be particularly a problem with English. I don't think it's that much of a problem in Yorkshire, but you can tell me. Certainly not a problem in my family. Sometimes I did look at them and think, it'd be quite nice to actually block a bit of energy. Yeah, so sometimes we're struggling with a bit of conditioning that says it's not okay to express emotions. So that's how we can block our emotions. We can block our emotions by meaningless work, by frustration, by lack of meaningful communication, and by conditioning. But the other thing he says is it's not just blocking our emotions, we can waste our emotions. We can block our energy, we can waste our energy. And we waste our energy by not using energy wisely. And the way Sangha actually talks about this is he says we waste our energy through negative emotions and negative speech. So it's got a whole list. So the first one is grumbling. So if we've got a tendency to grumble, it can waste our energy. It takes quite a lot of energy to grumble, and it just pours it into the ground. So I remember that Mo Baxter and I used to have this joke, because which was, when you start off that sentence where you say, if people would just not put empty margarine packets back in the fridge, and if people would just put their shoes nicely so that people don't trip over them, and if people would, so we used to have this joke when we were just about to start grumbling about something, we just go, if people. And actually it was quite helpful, because I do have a tendency to grumble a bit. But that's how we can kind of waste our energy. I mean, who cares? Most of it, who cares? They put an empty margarine packet in the fridge, you just take it out and wash it and put it in the recycling, or whatever you do with it. It's not a great drama. And the weather is the other thing, So, I mean, part of it is okay. Part of it is, I think, it's the way we also connect with each other. So it's a bit like having a communication exercise with someone you don't know. It's about, it's a bit cold at the moment, isn't it? There's no forecast weekend. It's like, so what you're really doing is saying, hello, I'm trying to make a connection with you. But it's also good to not really go downhill with that, because there is a lot to grumble about, which is but yeah, it's not just sort of endless, just an underlying quota of negativity, basically, that's finding an outlet. And along with that, he says about habitual criticism. Actually, I've been staying at the women's community, and they've got a fridge magnet. I think I've seen it in this visit anyway. I think it's in the women's community that says samsara is the tendency to find fault with others. Is that your? Yeah, it is your fridge magnet. Okay, it's in a roper. Dharma Mai hasn't noticed that fridge magnet. But yes, samsara is the tendency to find fault with others, and the Buddha talks about this in the Dhammapada as well. It's like it's very, very easy to find fault with others. It's very easy to kind of talk over that again and again and again. It's endlessly fascinating subject, actually, other people's faults, and it makes you feel so much kind of better about yourself, sort of. But actually, it's quite a waste of energy, and in a way, it does cultivate something quite negative. And what happens is as well that the person that you're talking to about that habitual criticism will start thinking, I'm next in line. You know, it's going to be me next. And if you do it to people, directly, it can really block their energy. So if you've got someone around you who's habitually critical, it can kind of shrink your being. Your energy becomes quite turgid and stuck because you know they're just waiting for the next opportunity to criticise you. And of course, there will come an opportunity to criticise you. So, you know, it drains our own energy, it wastes our own energy, but it wastes other people's energy too. He also talks about dismal Jimmyism. Dismal Jimmyism. He says in the war, you could get prosecuted for spreading alarm and despondency. And maybe we should. Feeling like, you know, you're all kind of full of ideas, oh no, it's not going to happen, oh, you know what's going to happen, you know, it's all going to pot, you know, have you seen politics, blah, 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 blah. And it's kind of spreading this atmosphere. You can suddenly see people's energy just sinking into the ground and enthusiasm just pouring underneath the soil. So it's very important not to just pour cold water on other people's dreams, really. You know, sometimes you just need to let people go for it. And maybe it's not going to be as bad as you think. The other one is gossip. So we all know about gossip. Again, I think this goes along with finding fault with others. And the other one is nagging, which again I think is a form of habitual criticism. So so these are the ways that we waste energy and we drain the energy of others. And one of the things that Bhante says is about the first precept, the first ethical precept about love. Is he says actually the main way to practice the first precept is to get out the way of others. Stop blocking them. And negativity obstructs the energy of others. It drains the energy of others. He said actually our reason for being, our reason for existence, if you like, is to grow and develop. And the main way to practice loving kindness is to just not obstruct our own development and not obstruct the development of others. And the main way we obstruct other people's development is just by that kind of negativity. So he says, don't waste our energy with negativity, sort of habitual negativity. But I think there's also something else as well, which he doesn't talk about, but is very, very important in the modern age, is that we have a device in our pocket that provides unlimited opportunities to waste energy. I mean, never before in the history of humanity have you been able to pull something out of your pocket and waste an entire day on absolute rubbish, on looking at videos of cats. You know, and the thing about the internet and phones is that it's highly addictive and it's always there. And it's the perfect way to not experience yourself. You know, so instead of whatever else we used to do, smoke. You know, we don't have to experience ourselves because we can just look at Facebook. So I think it's important to notice, when we want to waste our energy and what's behind that. Because why is it that we want to waste our energy in negativity and distractions? I think often it is that there is something underneath. There's something underneath that we don't really want to face. And so we waste our energy, we block our energy so that we don't really have to experience those uncomfortable feelings. And I think when we do experience those uncomfortable feelings, something interesting happens. I think what we can experience is maybe perhaps we can experience a sense of unsatisfactoriness or even a lack of meaning in our life, which tells us something about the way that we're living our life. Or maybe it's something that along the lines of an unfulfilled longing. Maybe within us there's a longing for something more that remains unfulfilled. And if we can stop wasting our energy, if we can stop draining our energy, and if we can stop blocking our energy, actually what we'll get in touch with is this sense that we are so much more, we have so much more capacity than we're living out at the moment. Maybe we can touch that sort of sense of nameless longing for our own potential. And if we can get in touch with that, something really exciting can happen. In a way, we can start living out that potential. So where does energy come from? In a way, the short answer for this is that energy comes from inspiration. I think inspiration is a bit of a funny word, because I think it can suggest a bit more like the near enemy of virya. It can suggest a sort of excitable, sort of great inspiration, you know, and I'm just so inspired by the Dharma, and a great flush of energy, which actually, in a way, we experience from time to time, but isn't necessarily an ongoing experience. We're not always inspired. You know, I've been practicing for quite a long time, and I have to say I'm not always inspired. It's not a constant feature of my Dharma life, is that kind of great levels of inspiration. But what I do notice about myself is that I'm cultivating a very steady momentum towards enlightenment, and I have absolute confidence in that steady momentum of sustained activity rather than necessarily a great burst of inspiration. And in a way, that kind of steady activity, that steady momentum towards the goal, is really what we call in Buddhism Shraddha, or faith, Saddha in Pali. And that sense of faith comes when our life is in touch with our values, and when we're living from what's meaningful, and when we can express that meaning to others. It's when we feel in touch with something beyond us. So Sangharakshita talks about faith as he says it's when what's ultimate in us resonates with what is ultimate in the universe. But I think there's also something else to add to that. It's when what's ultimate in us resonates also with what's ultimate in others, what's ultimate in other people, and in communicating with other people. So what we try and do in our Dharma practice is we try and become aware of that kind of steady momentum towards enlightenment, or steady momentum towards wisdom and compassion and energy. And when we're in touch with what's most meaningful in our lives, and we're living that out in our lifestyle, but also in our communication. And I think that's why energy tends to arise in contexts where we really feel that we are living out our values, when we're living from those values, and we're engaged in meaningful communication. So often we find we've got more energy, for example, when we meditate. And I think it's because it's a bit like, well, in that time of meditation, we're doing what's most meaningful to us. We're cultivating awareness and love. Energy arises in retreats because we're meditating, but we're also doing puja, and we're also communicating to each other from the basis of our depths, and that helps us to become alive. We also can experience energy arising when we are in contact with the arts. You know, maybe we go to see a beautiful painting, or a concert, or something like that, where we really feel like something of value is being expressed beyond the mundane, you know, beyond kind of ordinary states of consciousness, and that can give us a lot of energy. So I suppose what is really important to in cultivating energy is just noticing where you come alive, and following that through, and not having too much idea about what it should be that makes you come alive. As long as it's not grossly unskillful, noticing quality of energy, not just energy itself, but qualities of energy. As long as it's not grossly unskillful, actually just noticing what it is that brings us alive, and trying to do more of that. So whatever it is, really. And I think what we can also do for each other is help each other contact what's most alive with us. So I remember I had an elderly neighbour in Sheffield, and she lived below me, and every Saturday I'd go to see her, and she had a habitual quota of negativity, which she used to express quite freely for quite a long time as well. So there was a bit of negativity and grumbling. It's quite hard to be around. But for some reason I decided that we were karmically linked. And we are still karmically linked. I have to say she's a really good friend of mine now. But anyway, so I just thought there's a way through. This negativity is an unfulfilled longing. So I wasn't going to say to her, your negativity is unfulfilled. What I decided is I was going to find that thing that brought her alive. By hook or by crook, I was going to find that thing that brought her alive. And you know what I did? Which is, I found the thing that brought her alive with that clear, bright spring of energy, which was the poetry of Mary Oliver. I'll forever be grateful to Mary Oliver, because what I found was that actually she really loved nature, and that she really loved poetry, and she's housebound, she couldn't go out in nature, she couldn't see these things. But there was something about Mary Oliver which united nature and poetry, and suddenly she became a different person. It was like there was this key that unlocked her whole life. It brought her alive and it enabled her to communicate with other people. And she started to make friends. She used to hardly see anyone. It was just me, really. But then she started to make friends. And I think this really opened her out. So we need to find that thing in ourselves, whether it's dance or football or, whatever it is that brings you alive. And really, really draw on that. A little bit more. I'm going to say it a little bit more. There's another state. There's also a state in Buddhism that is not just. There's not just virya. There's a state of being called samvega. And samvega literally means agitation, fear, anxiety, thrill, or religious emotion. And it's a very important quality in the early scriptures that one has to develop. And the reason I wanted to mention it tonight, actually, is because it's said to be the urgency in spiritual practice that arises particularly when we go on pilgrimage. This is especially for Sean. That when you go on pilgrimage, samvega is meant to arise. And there's a really wonderful author called John Strong who talks about this, and talks about pilgrimage. And he talks about the importance in pilgrimage of presence and absence. So what we do is when we go to a site like Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightenment, we have a sense the Buddha got enlightened here. No, he actually was here, sitting here, and he became enlightened. And at the same time, you have a sense of absence. So my favourite part of Bodh Gaya is that you have the Vajratara, which is the diamond seat on which you got enlightenment. It's just a slab of rock. And next to that are these two big kind of circles of rock which have empty footprints. And John Strong says that basically wherever you get the presence of the Buddha, you also get a kind of pictorial depiction of his absence, so the empty footprints. So you have a sense, he was here, and now he's not. And the combination of those two forces, the sense of presence and the sense of absence, gives rise to urgency. And I think that happens in all of our lives, because what happens is sometimes we get a sense of our own potential. We get our own sense of our own potential for Buddhahood, or the sense of potential for other people's Buddhahood. And we also get a sense that we're not there yet. And when those two forces come together in this sort of way that you can't ignore presence, you can't ignore the potential for Buddhahood, but you can't ignore the fact that you're not actually enlightened, or they're not actually enlightened. When you bring those two sort of irreconcilable forces together, samvega, urgency arises. And the Buddha talks about this as a real motivating for his spiritual life. He said that when before he was enlightened, he saw that all people were struggling like fish in water too shallow, desperately trying to take breaths, and they were running around in agitation. And he said, but at the same time, he saw that what was making them run around in agitation was a thorn lodged deep in the heart, and he saw that that thorn could be taken out. So that's the kind of sense that we can really build up, that sense of thrill and urgency and energy, is to know that it's possible and know that we're not there yet. Know that the thorn can be taken out, but also see the sort of destructive habits that we get into. So yes, that's a little taster of samvega. I think samvega is a really interesting quality and probably a whole talk of itself. So yes, energy arises in dependence on conditions, and it means that we have to kind of cultivate almost an aesthetically active sense, sensing the quality of energy and how to cultivate it, and not to block it in ourselves and others, but not to waste it, and not to waste it in negativity and distraction. And to keep it bright and vibrant, looking where we come alive, looking to where we find meaning and where we find value in our lives, and keeping alive to that quality of energy itself, like a bright spring coming up in a great lake. And I think it's also very, very important when we find that energy is to share it with others, to share from our depths. So I'm just going to end by a little reading from the Vipakkirti Nadesha. And he's giving this, he's teaching Mara's daughters, but that's another story. He says, sisters, a single lamp may light hundreds of thousands of lamps without itself being diminished. Likewise, sisters, a single bodhisattva may establish many hundreds of thousands of living beings in enlightenment without her own inspiration being diminished. In fact, not only does it not diminish, it grows stronger. Likewise, the more you teach and demonstrate skillful qualities to others, the more you grow with respect to those skillful qualities. So this gives an idea. If we share our energy, it doesn't mean that our energy has to get diminished. If we share our inspiration, if we share that bright quality and where we come alive with others, we'll help that energy to grow collectively, and we won't become diminished.